You think you know soul food? Think again. African American kitchens once overflowed with dishes that carried centuries of tradition, survival, and love before quietly disappearing from Sunday tables and family gatherings. Let's dig into 60 African American soul food classics no one makes anymore. Cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food, it was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Corn husk tamales in the Delta carried a story of adaptation and resilience, blending African American creativity with Mexican influence. Families filled corn husks with seasoned cornmeal dough and sometimes small bits of pork or vegetables, then simmered them slowly until firm. They were portable, hearty, and could stretch a handful of ingredients into meals for many. In the Delta, these tamales became a community staple, often sold from wagons or small kitchens to neighbors who could not afford restaurant food. Wrapped in corn husks, they represented thrift and tradition, proof that families could borrow from other foodways and make it their own. Tamales were often shared at gatherings or passed around during long workdays, feeding both body and spirit. They carried the memory of cornfields and the smell of simmering pots, becoming part of African American culinary history. Delta tamales showed that even in hard times, food could carry flavor, heritage, and strength into the lives of those who needed it most. Pecan pie was the Southern reunion classic that tasted like sweetness crunch and memory baked into a golden brown slice that reflected the trees and fields many families grew up around. Grandmothers gathered pecans from the yard or accepted bags from neighbors who shared what their own trees had dropped. washing and sorting the nuts before stirring them into the glossy filling of sugar, eggs, butter, and syrup that came together like a thick, shining caramel. As the pie baked, the top formed a crackled layer of toasted pecans, while the inside stayed soft, sweet, and gooey, creating the perfect contrast when cut into warm slices. Served at reunions, pecan pie reminded everyone of fall harvests, winter holidays, and afternoons spent cracking shells on front porches while stories filled the air. It was rich but never overwhelming, and even a thin slice felt decadent and comforting. Families carried it to gatherings wrapped in foil or cloth and placed it proudly among the other desserts, knowing it would vanish quickly once plates were passed. Pecan pie carried history, flavor, and the strength of generations who knew how to make something precious from simple ingredients. Ham bone and bean soup transformed the leftover bone from Sunday's ham into entirely new meals that fed families for days with minimal additional ingredients needed for completion. The bone was placed in large pots with dried beans, onions, celery, carrots, and water, then simmered for hours until the beans were creamy and the remaining ham fell off the bone into the soup. The marrow and residual meat flavored the entire pot, creating rich soup that tasted like prosperity despite costing almost nothing to make from leftovers. This represented the ultimate waste-nothing philosophy, ensuring every part of expensive Sunday ham served multiple purposes throughout the week for maximum value. The soup was served with cornbread or crackers, providing complete protein from beans and ham combined in perfect proportions. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for families on impossibly tight budgets. Ham bone and bean soup showed how one ingredient could serve families repeatedly when prepared thoughtfully. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Hoppin' John was more than food. It was a wish whispered into every new year and a memory of old fields and family prayers. Made from black-eyed peas, rice, and a scrap of salted pork, it carried a meaning far greater than its humble parts. Each bowl symbolized luck, wealth, and resilience, a quiet hope for better days ahead. Born on plantations where ingredients were scarce, Hoppin' John turned survival into tradition. The peas represented coins, the rice abundance, and the pork, the flavor of prosperity. It became a holiday staple across generations, cooked in cast-iron pots and served with greens on the side. The slow simmer filled homes with comfort, while the taste spoke of endurance. People didn't just eat Hoppin' John, they believed in it. It was a way to honor ancestors who worked the land and still found joy in sharing a simple meal. Every spoonful connected past to present, hardship to hope. In the rhythm of the South, Hoppin' John remains a dish that keeps faith alive, proving that luck can be cooked, shared, and passed down like love itself. Catfish stew was a hearty dish that brought riverside living directly into the kitchen. Catfish was plentiful in southern waters and could be caught by hand or with simple nets, making it accessible to families with little money. The fish was simmered in a tomato-based broth with onions, peppers, and sometimes potatoes, creating a stew that was filling and flavorful. Served with rice or cornbread, it became a meal that could feed many people from just a few ingredients. Catfish stew represented more than thrift. It symbolized self-sufficiency and the ability to survive off the land and water. For Black families, It was also a dish tied to community, as fishing trips often brought people together. The stew carried smoky, tangy flavors that warmed the soul, reminding everyone at the table of home. In times of hardship, catfish stew was both sustenance and tradition, feeding generations with simple but powerful nourishment. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the dessert that always arrived in the biggest glass dish, the one carried with two hands because it was filled to the top with layers of comfort, history, and family pride. Grandmothers lined the bottom with vanilla wafers and then poured warm homemade custard over them, letting the cookies soften slowly until they became part of the pudding itself. Tender, sweet, and soaked with flavor. Sliced bananas were tucked between the layers in soft, pale rounds, adding freshness that lifted the sweetness and made the dish feel alive. More custard came next, then more wafers, and then another layer again until the dish was nearly overflowing. Some finished it with whipped topping, while others insisted on meringue browned in the oven until the peaks turned golden. When the dish hit the reunion table, spoons clattered against bowls and children rushed forward because everyone knew banana pudding disappeared fast. It tasted like childhood afternoons, like front porches, like kitchens filled with steam and voices talking over one another while dessert chilled in the refrigerator. Banana pudding was beloved not because it was fancy, but because every family made it slightly differently and each version carried its own memories. It was the dessert that united generations one scoop at a time. Homemade vinegar pie was a dessert that showed just how clever cooks could be in the face of scarcity. With fruit hard to come by, families learned to create a pie filling from vinegar, sugar, butter, and flour, which baked into a sweet, tangy custard-like dessert. It was not the same as apple or lemon, but it offered brightness and sweetness when nothing else was available. Vinegar pie became a symbol of ingenuity, proof that even pantry staples could turn into something special. Served at Sunday dinners or holidays, it gave families a sense of normalcy when times were anything but normal. The taste was surprising, tart yet sweet, simple yet memorable. Families passed recipes down through word of mouth, and many children remembered vinegar pie as the dessert that made hard days feel less heavy. It carried the message that joy and resourcefulness could coexist in the kitchen. Vinegar pie became a reminder of how far determination could stretch. Soot biscuits were the kind of food you learned to trust when the fire was all you had. They were baked in soot-covered Dutch ovens, set right into the coals until the smell of toasted flour filled the air. The outsides came out black and charred, but inside they were soft, warm, and sweet from the faint taste of smoke. You brushed off the ash and split them open, steam rising like a small blessing. They were eaten with syrup, molasses, or even gravy if the morning allowed it. Families traveling, camping, or working the land knew this trick well. It was food that came straight from the earth and fire, raw and honest. Soot biscuits did not look like much, but they carried pride. They were proof that comfort could come from the simplest effort, that even ashes could feed the body and soothe the soul. The smell lingered on your hands and clothes, a reminder that good things sometimes came wrapped in smoke. Each bite tasted like work and gratitude, the flavor of survival baked in real flame. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Fried bologna sandwiches elevated the cheapest lunch meat into something children actually requested. especially when the edges curled up, creating crispy cups filled with mustard and tangy pickles. Thick slices of bologna were scored around the edges and fried in skillets until the center puffed up and the edges crisped and caramelized perfectly. The meat was placed on white bread with yellow mustard and sweet pickle slices, creating sandwiches that were simple but satisfying in ways that transcended their humble ingredients completely. The frying transformed the bologna's texture and intensified its flavor, making it genuinely more delicious than the cold version ever could be. Mothers packed these for school lunches, and children ate them without complaint or embarrassment about their simple nature or low cost. In the 1970s, bologna was among the cheapest proteins available, affordable enough that even struggling families could buy it regularly for quick meals. Fried bologna sandwiches represented treats rather than poverty, showing that simple pleasures didn't require expensive ingredients. Salmon croquettes served as mini appetizers were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. Ash cake bread was born out of fire and hunger, a recipe that came alive in the heart of hard times. Cornmeal, salt, and water were all it needed. The dough was pressed together by hand and buried right into the hot ashes of a wood fireplace. It baked slowly, the outside hardening into a smoky crust, while the inside stayed soft, golden, and warm. When it came out, people brushed away the ashes, broke it open, and drizzled it with syrup or molasses. It had a taste that was both sweet and earthy, like the memory of home on a Sunday morning. Ash cake bread was a working person's meal, something you could make after a long day without needing an oven or a fancy pan. It was food that did not waste or wait, made for those who had nothing extra but still found comfort in what little they had. The smell of it filled small cabins and quiet kitchens, the sound of the crackling fire mixing with laughter or prayer. Every crumb reminded people that strength could grow even from ashes. Sorghum syrup bread was a wartime and Depression-era answer to expensive refined sugar. Sorghum, a tall grass grown widely in the South, was boiled down into a thick, dark syrup that tasted earthy and sweet. Families would use it in place of sugar, mixing it into simple bread doughs to stretch rations and still enjoy something satisfying. Sorghum syrup bread was hearty, with a flavor that carried a touch of bitterness, but warmed the spirit. Children often slathered slices with butter or drippings, while adults enjoyed it with strong coffee. It was a farm food at its core, tied directly to the fields where sorghum stalks grew. Sorghum bread meant that no one had to give up sweetness completely even when sugar prices were too high or stores ran out. This loaf was practical, easy to make at home, and deeply tied to southern soil. After times of scarcity passed, sorghum faded, but the memory of that dark bread stayed. Caramel cake was the kind of reunion dessert that revealed who in the family had the patience and skill to stand over a hot stove, stirring icing long enough to make it perfect. The cake layers themselves were simple, tender and pale, but the icing was where the magic lived, thick, sweet, and slow cooked, until it deepened into a golden brown that tasted like butter warmth and memory. Grandmothers guarded their caramel icing method with pride because it took steady hands and a calm heart to keep the sugar from scorching as it bubbled and darkened in the pot. Once ready, the icing was poured over the stacked layers while still warm, spreading into silky drapes that coated every inch before cooling into a soft caramel shell. At reunions, The caramel cake always looked humble on the outside, but the moment it was sliced, people hurried forward for a piece because they knew the flavor inside carried generations of practice. The icing melted on the tongue with a sweetness that felt deep and comforting, and the cake beneath was tender enough to soak up every drop. Caramel cake tasted like real labor poured into something meant to be shared and celebrated. It reminded everyone that the best desserts came from time, attention, and love stirred slowly over a warm stove. Crowder pea stew was a variant of black-eyed peas that found its way into countless kitchens during hard years. Crowder peas, smaller and creamier than black-eyed peas, were simmered down with onions, peppers, and bits of smoked meat if any were available. The stew was thick, filling, and high in protein, making it essential for families who needed food that stretched far. Served with cornbread or rice, Crowder pea stew could feed many mouths at little cost. It was one of those dishes that reflected the ingenuity of turning simple legumes into full meals that carried flavor and strength. The stew also tied into a long history of peas as a staple in African and Southern food traditions. Families leaned on it not only because it was affordable, but because it was familiar and comforting. Crowder pea stew was more than food. It was a lifeline and a cultural anchor in times of scarcity. Salt and sugar apples were a quick delight on long afternoons when the pantry was bare. A single apple could become a treat with just a pinch of salt and a sprinkle of sugar rubbed into its skin. The salt made the sweetness shine, the sugar made the tartness dance, and together they created a taste sharper than candy. Children learned this trick from mothers and grandmothers who refused to let poverty steal joy. It was a snack that cost nothing but offered everything: brightness, laughter, and something to hold on to. Workers carried salted apples to the fields, students packed them for lunch, and families ate them under porches as the day cooled. The juice ran down your fingers, sticky and satisfying, proof that small pleasures still existed even when times were hard. Salt and sugar apples were a symbol of gratitude, of finding sweetness in hardship. They taught a quiet lesson that flavor does not come from excess, but from attention. Every bite felt like hope, crisp, honest, and alive. Pimento cheese pinwheels made with tortillas spread with creamy pimento cheese and rolled into tight spirals created colorful, easy-to-eat bites that children grabbed enthusiastically. Aunties would spread flour tortillas with homemade pimento cheese made from sharp cheddar, cream cheese, diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings. The tortillas were then rolled tightly into logs, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated for several hours to firm up and make slicing easier. Once chilled, the logs were unwrapped and sliced into rounds about half an inch thick, each pinwheel revealing the bright orange cheese dotted with red pimento pieces. In 1970s, Black households, pimento cheese pinwheels represented modern entertaining, a variation on traditional pimento cheese that made serving easier and more elegant. Children loved pimento cheese pinwheels because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and tasted like their favorite spread in a fun new format. Corncob jelly was one of those miracles that made people smile at their own cleverness. When the corn was shucked and the cobs left behind, no one dared to throw them out. Those bare cobs went into a big pot of water, boiled until the water turned golden and sweet-smelling. Sugar and a little lemon juice got added next, then everything was strained until the liquid gleamed like honey. The result was a jelly that tasted faintly of corn, syrupy and light, the perfect spread for biscuits or toast. People used it when fruit was scarce, and it carried a quiet pride that came from turning scraps into sweetness. Grandparents remembered it from their childhood, when waste was not an option and imagination ruled the kitchen. Corncob jelly was proof that flavor could be coaxed out of what others might ignore. It was soft, shining, and made with patience. Those who tasted it never forgot that feeling of abundance born from scarcity. Each spoonful told the story of hands that worked hard, saved everything, and still found time to make something beautiful. Fried pork chops smothered in gravy turned inexpensive bone-in chops into Sunday dinner centerpieces that made families feel like they were eating something truly special and celebratory. The chops were seasoned generously with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged in flour, then fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy all over. After removing the chops, the same skillet was used to make gravy from the drippings, flour, and milk, creating rich sauce poured over the meat. The chops were returned to the gravy and simmered until tender, with the sauce soaking into the crispy coating beautifully. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, this became meals that satisfied on multiple levels at once. In the 1970s, bone-in pork chops were affordable protein, especially when purchased in bulk from local butchers who knew their customers personally and offered deals. Children eagerly anticipated smothered pork chops, knowing they meant something special was happening that deserved celebration. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Catfish stew was born from the rivers that fed hungry families when money could not. It was a fisherman's meal, made with whatever the day's catch brought in and whatever else could be spared. The fish simmered with onions, peppers, and a few spices until the broth turned hearty and golden. Sometimes a few potatoes or tomatoes joined the pot to stretch the servings further. The flavor was bold, earthy, and honest, born of water, labor, and faith. Along the banks of muddy rivers, folks gathered to clean, season, and cook together, turning scarcity into celebration. Every spoonful tasted of resilience, the kind that came from knowing you could always find a way. Catfish stew wasn't just dinner, it was fellowship, a gathering around the fire with laughter and storytelling. Even when the world seemed empty, this stew filled bellies and hearts alike. It was the living memory of a people who found abundance in places others overlooked, a symbol of perseverance floating in a pot of simple, sustaining joy. Fig preserves cake was the dessert that reflected the canning traditions many Black Southern families held, dear turning jars of sweet home-preserved figs into a dense spiced cake that tasted like memory itself. The preserves were folded into the batter, along with warm spices and chopped nuts, creating a moist, tender texture that stayed flavorful long after it baked. As the cake cooled, the aroma of fig cinnamon and caramel, like sweetness, filled the kitchen, drawing relatives toward the dessert table. Early fig preserves cake sliced into generous pieces that tasted both old-fashioned and luxurious, especially for families proud of their canning shelves. It was a dessert that honored the work of preserving summer fruit for winter and reunion meals. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black households smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Churn milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churn milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Souse, also known as head cheese, was a dish made from pig scraps that turned thrift into sustenance. The meat from a pig's head, including tongue and cheeks, was simmered, chopped, and set in a broth with vinegar and spices. Once cooled, it formed a terrine-like dish that could be sliced and served cold, usually with bread. Families valued it because it made use of parts of the hog that others ignored, ensuring that nothing edible was wasted. Souse carried tangy flavors from the vinegar and a dense texture that was filling and practical. Though not everyone loved it, those who grew up with it remembered it as a staple on the table during lean times. It represented survival and ingenuity, transforming scraps into something lasting. In households where every bite mattered, souse stood as proof that determination and resourcefulness could make even the most overlooked cuts into meaningful food. Chocolate sheet cake was the reunion dessert designed to feed a crowd with soft, generous squares that children grabbed with both hands while adults reached for the corner pieces thick with frosting. The batter mixed into a smooth, dark pour that baked quickly in a large pan, rising into a tender cake that stayed moist even in summer heat. The warm cake received a melted chocolate frosting that spread easily over the top, settling into a shiny, smooth layer that cracked softly under the knife. Families loved it because one pan held enough for everyone, and because the flavor was rich, comforting, and impossible to resist. Chocolate sheet cake tasted like togetherness, celebration, and the joy of passing plates down long tables one piece after another. Crumb-fried saltfish was proof that even the toughest cuts could be transformed with a little creativity. Saltfish was cheap and lasted forever, but it was hard and strong-flavored, needing love and time to make it shine. Families would soak it overnight, then roll it in crushed biscuit crumbs before frying it in a skillet until golden. The smell of it could draw neighbors from down the street, salty and rich with that perfect crisp edge. Paired with grits or boiled greens, it made breakfast feel like a celebration. The crumbs gave it crunch, the oil gave it warmth, and the memories gave it meaning. In every Southern kitchen, there was a version of this dish waiting to happen, handed down and reimagined through generations. Crumb-fried saltfish was not fancy food, it was pride disguised as thrift, a simple recipe that carried the power to feed both stomach and spirit. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside. Then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth, while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings. Fried chicken livers with hot sauce delivered iron-rich organ meat in forms that even children would eat, especially when coated in seasoned flour and fried crispy golden brown. The livers were soaked in buttermilk to remove any bitterness, dredged in flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne, then fried quickly in hot oil until perfectly cooked. The result was crispy outside with creamy, almost mousse-like interior that melted in the mouth when cooked properly without overcooking into grainy texture. These provided concentrated nutrition, including iron, B vitamins, and protein in affordable packages costing less than $1 per pound at markets. Families served them as main dishes or snacks, with hot sauce being mandatory for many who loved the spicy, rich combination that made them addictive. In the 1970s, chicken livers were considered poor people's food that wealthier families avoided completely, meaning they stayed affordable and accessible for struggling families. Fried chicken livers represented nutritional wisdom disguised as soul food, proving that the cheapest cuts often delivered the most essential nutrients. Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were not for the impatient or the faint-hearted. They demanded long hours of boiling and careful cleaning before the meat turned silky soft and rich with flavor. For many families, this dish represented endurance itself, transforming what others threw away into a delicacy that filled the soul. The vinegar cut through the heaviness, adding a tang that woke the taste buds and stretched the appetite. When cooked just right, the gelatin shimmered, thickening the sauce and coating every tender bite. Pig's feet weren't glamorous, but they were honest. They told the truth about survival, about making something from nearly nothing and taking pride in it. Around tables, they sparked stories and laughter, the kind only shared by people who'd known struggle and joy in equal measure. The smell of that vinegar sauce carried through neighborhoods like a promise that good eating didn't need riches. It reminded everyone that patience, thrift, and skill could turn even the roughest ingredients into a dish worthy of celebration. Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were a triumph of flavor and faith, proof that nothing worth keeping ever comes easy. Collard green Potlikker soup was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. After collard greens were boiled with ham hocks or smoked meat, the leftover broth was packed with nutrients and flavor. Families would save it, thicken it with beans, rice, or cornbread crumbs, and serve it as a soup. It turned what could have been discarded liquid into a meal that could stretch for days. Potlikker was praised for its richness and vitamins, especially during times when fresh vegetables were limited. Black families in the South cherished it as part of their food culture, a reminder that even scraps held value. The taste of Potlikker soup was smoky, salty, and comforting, carrying both sustenance and heritage in every bowl. It reminded people that resourcefulness was a form of survival and strength. For many households, it was a dish that fed both body and spirit when times were most difficult. Praline candy made with pecans was the after-dinner treat that moved from hand to hand at family reunions, wrapped in pieces of wax paper that stuck slightly to the sugary surface. These candies were cooked in heavy pots where butter, sugar, and evaporated milk simmered together until the mixture thickened into a fragrant caramel-colored base. She stirred constantly with a wooden spoon, watching for the moment when the mixture coated the spoon just right. Then she added the pecans, letting them tumble into the pot and soak up the sweetness before she dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper sheets spread across the counter. As the pralines cooled, they set into soft, rich pieces that melted on the tongue with a taste of butter, brown sugar, and roasted nuts. Children waited impatiently for them to harden, and adults reached for them with the same excitement praline candy felt like generosity because each piece was made by hand and shared freely across the reunion. It tasted warm, sweet, and familiar, carrying the flavor of tradition in every bite. Chitlins with hot sauce represented both celebration food and survival food, the ultimate nose-to-tail eating that wasted nothing from the hog. Pork intestines required hours of meticulous cleaning and preparation before being slowly boiled with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until tender enough to eat. The process was labor-intensive, and the smell was unmistakable, filling entire city blocks and announcing that someone was cooking chitlins with pride. Despite the strong aroma, properly prepared chitlins had unique flavor and texture that devotees genuinely loved, especially with hot sauce and vinegar cutting through richness. They were traditionally served during holidays and special occasions, particularly around New Year's, connecting directly to slavery survival strategies. In the 1970s, chitlins remained affordable protein that fed large gatherings without breaking limited budgets for celebration. The preparation was often communal activity, with women gathering to clean and cook together while sharing stories. Chitlins represented cultural continuity, proving that even foods born from oppression could become sources of pride. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Collard greens with ham hocks were a kind of southern poetry in a pot. Every batch began with water, greens, and a meaty ham hock that filled the kitchen with the scent of home. The greens simmered slowly, wilting into something rich and earthy while the hock gave off its smoky depth. This wasn't a quick meal. It was an act of devotion, a ritual that demanded time and patience. Every generation had its own trick for getting them just right, maybe a dash of vinegar, a sprinkle of sugar, or a secret seasoning passed down by word of mouth. Collards carried pride, not pity. They were the food of workers, field hands, and families that knew the meaning of resilience. Served alongside cornbread, they became the soul of Sunday dinners, a moment when everyone gathered to taste a little peace after a week of hard living. The broth, or potlikker, was so treasured it was sipped from cups when the greens were gone. In every spoonful was survival seasoned with hope. Collard greens with ham hocks stood as proof that even in the toughest times, comfort could still be coaxed from the simplest things. Fried corn pone was a dish that required almost nothing but cornmeal, water, and lard, yet it managed to fill stomachs during times of want. It was denser than cornbread and more rustic, formed into small patties and fried in cast-iron skillets until golden. Families leaned on it for breakfast, lunch, or supper because it was inexpensive, used ingredients they almost always had, and could be made quickly. Corn was abundant across the South, and every pantry had a sack of cornmeal that could be stretched into meals again and again. Eating fried corn pone often meant there was no wheat bread to be had, but no one went hungry. It was eaten with beans, dipped in potlikker, or just on its own with a smear of molasses or syrup if available. Fried corn pone reflected the determination to create something warm and satisfying even when the cupboards were close to bare. 7-Up cake was the bright citrus-soaked reunion classic that brought a cheerful spark to every dessert table thanks to its airy texture and lemon-lime sweetness. The batter mixed into a pale, silky pour that gained its lift from the soda folded carefully inside a trick that made the cake light, tender, and bursting with flavor. as it baked the kitchen filled with a fresh citrus scent that felt like summer even on cloudy days, and children hovered near the oven, hoping the timer would ring early. When the cake cooled, it revealed soft golden curves shaped by the bundt pan, making it one of the most eye-catching desserts at any family gathering. A warm sugar glaze was poured over the top, soaking into every ridge and giving each bite a sweet, bright finish. Families looked for it at every reunion because it tasted like celebration without costing much to make. Each slice carried the memory of afternoons spent laughing outdoors and long tables full of food that brought people together year after year. Stewed rutabagas were a staple in southern kitchens during lean years, a root vegetable that could be boiled down and flavored with pork fat for depth. Rutabagas were cheap, stored well through the winter, and filled in for potatoes when those were too expensive or scarce. Families would peel, chop, and simmer them until tender, often serving them alongside beans or cornbread to complete a meal. The dish was hearty without being costly, and it carried a slightly sweet, earthy flavor that grew familiar to children who had little else on their plates. Pork fat or drippings were often added to give richness, turning the humble root into something more comforting. Stewed rutabagas became a dish tied to survival, reflecting both garden ingenuity and frugality. They were not glamorous, but they were dependable, and that mattered most. For many families, a pot of rutabagas simmering on the stove was the scent of perseverance. They represented sustenance and simplicity in the hardest of times. Mud pie was not the dessert people think of today, but a savory meal that brought warmth when meat was scarce. It began with mashed potatoes, thick and creamy from yesterday's supper, spread across the bottom of a pan. A layer of bread crusts came next, torn from loaves that had grown stiff with time. Then came a pour of rich brown gravy, made from drippings and flour, seeping into the bread and potatoes like rain into soil. When it baked, the top turned dark and glossy, the inside soft and heavy with flavor. It looked muddy, hence its name, but it tasted like comfort itself. Families made it on Sundays, when scraps were gathered and hope was baked back into the week. The smell filled the house and called everyone to the table. Children fought for the crispy corners while parents smiled in quiet relief. Mud pie carried pride in every bite, the kind of pride that came from making something out of almost nothing. It was a meal that felt like a miracle, served hot from the oven and eaten slow, one spoonful at a time, a reminder that even hard days could end sweetly. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated, the cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Fried chicken wings, before they became trendy and expensive, were the discarded parts of chickens that Black families transformed into crispy, flavorful snacks and satisfying meals. The wings were seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, then fried until golden and crispy in hot oil or lard that made them absolutely delicious. The skin crisped perfectly while the small amount of meat stayed juicy, creating satisfying bites that disappeared quickly from plates at gatherings. These weren't considered premium food in the 1970s, when most people wanted breasts and thighs instead of bony wings nobody else wanted. That meant wings cost almost nothing per pound, sometimes given away free by butchers trying to clear inventory from coolers. Families made huge batches for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and white bread for perfect combinations. Fried chicken wings represented finding value in what others overlooked, transforming cheap cuts into genuinely delicious food that eventually became so popular they're now expensive. Pickled pig's feet were treasured treats appearing at celebrations and family gatherings whenever someone wanted to honor Southern traditions and ancestral heritage. Fresh pig's feet were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then packed into jars with hot spiced vinegar, onions, bay leaves, and peppercorns for long preservation. After weeks of curing, the feet developed complex, tangy flavors, while the vinegar turned the meat silky and gelatinous with unique texture. They were eaten cold, straight from jars, with bones pulled clean and every bit of meat and skin consumed without waste. The gelatinous texture was considered especially nourishing, believed to be good for joints and overall health when consumed regularly. In the 1970s, pig's feet cost almost nothing because most Americans avoided them completely, making them perfect for Black families honoring traditional foodways passed down through generations. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and which spices created perfect balance. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Molasses bread was the sweetness that softened hard weeks. Made from sorghum or cane syrup, it was a dark, sticky loaf that baked up rich and fragrant even when sugar was scarce. A single jar of syrup could stretch through countless loaves, turning thrift into comfort. It came out of the oven glossy and dense, the kind of bread you sliced thin to make it last longer. The taste was deep and earthy, sweet without being showy, a flavor born from the fields where sorghum stalks waved in the sun. On Sundays, families shared it warm with butter or a drizzle of leftover syrup, its smell filling every corner of home. The crust held a quiet crunch, while the inside stayed soft, like memory itself. It was both humble and proud, a loaf that didn't need fancy ingredients to feel like celebration. For people who knew want, molasses bread was a small luxury, a reward for making it through the week. Each slice carried the warmth of family hands and the sweetness of work well done. In every crumb was proof that joy could rise from scarcity and bake into something lasting. Hog maw stew was a dish that took something most would discard and transformed it into a centerpiece for the table. Hog maw, the lining of a pig's stomach, was cleaned carefully, then stuffed with potatoes, onions, and spices before being simmered until tender. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply flavorful, stretching small amounts of ingredients into a meal that could feed an entire family. In times when money was scarce, hog maw stew allowed families to make use of what they had, proving that nothing from the animal went to waste. It was often served at gatherings where one pot had to go far, reminding everyone of the value of sharing and stretching food. The dish carried cultural roots tied to both survival and celebration, a reminder that even hard times could produce food that comforted and united. Hog maw stew was not fancy, but it represented ingenuity, thrift, and strength in the face of want. Ambrosia salad was the bowl of sweetness that appeared in chilled dishes at nearly every reunion table made from fruit coconut cream and the soft, fluffy textures families associated with celebration. She mixed oranges, pineapple grapes, and cherries with whipped cream or sour cream, depending on family preference, stirring until everything glowed with color and looked like a rainbow poured into a bowl. Coconut flakes added texture and sweetness, while marshmallows softened into the creamy base, making each spoonful light yet rich and perfect for passing around before the heat settled in. Sometimes she added pecans. Sometimes she added a splash of cherry juice, but no matter the variation, the spirit of the dish stayed the same. Ambrosia salad was both simple and festive, offering cool relief during hot afternoons, when reunions stretched into long outdoor gatherings and children ran between tables barefoot. It tasted like summer fruit and shared laughter, and its bright colors made the dessert table look joyful, like a celebration that never needed permission to shine. Red beans and rice became Monday tradition, using Sunday's leftover ham bone to create entirely new meals that cost almost nothing but fed families for days. Dried red beans were soaked overnight, then simmered all day with the ham bone, onions, celery, bell peppers, and Creole seasonings until creamy and thick. The long cooking broke down the bean starches, creating natural gravy that coated white rice perfectly while providing complete protein. Mothers could start the pot in the morning and let it simmer while doing laundry, making it perfectly practical for busy days filled with household responsibilities. The dish improved with time, tasting even better the second day when flavors had fully melded together completely. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for tight budgets. Red beans and rice showed how yesterday's scraps became today's sustenance, with nothing wasted and everyone fed satisfyingly. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Onion skin tea was one of those old remedies that could quiet both body and soul. When someone had a cough or a fever, or when food simply ran out, a pot of this humble tea came to the rescue. Dried onion skins were gathered from the corners of the kitchen, rinsed and steeped in boiling water until the liquid turned golden brown. The scent was sharp but comforting, a mix of earth and sweetness that filled the air with warmth. Some added honey if they had it, or a squeeze of lemon, but even plain, it had its own charm. People believed it could heal and strengthen, and maybe it did, because hope itself can be medicine. Onion skin tea was born from patience, brewed by hands that knew how to stretch every last bit of life from what they had. It was the taste of resilience and care, a sip that made you believe tomorrow might be gentler. Sweet potato biscuits with honey were a beloved comfort food that turned humble ingredients into something special. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in the South, cheap to grow, and full of natural sweetness. By mashing them into biscuit dough, families created soft, tender breads that did not require as much flour or fat. Fresh biscuits out of the oven were topped with a drizzle of local honey if it was available, making them feel indulgent despite their simplicity. These biscuits were often served for breakfast, but they could also accompany stews or fried fish. They filled stomachs and brought warmth to the table, offering both nutrition and comfort. Sweet potatoes symbolized resilience, and honey added a touch of hope in difficult times. Together, they created a dish that carried meaning well beyond its taste. Sweet potato biscuits with honey reflected the heart of soul food, making something beautiful and memorable from ingredients that were always within reach. Apple Brown Betty was the cozy, thrifty dessert that showed up at reunions because it made good use of leftover bread biscuits or cornbread, turning them into something warm, comforting, and sweet. Apples were sliced thin, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, and a little lemon, and then layered beneath buttery crumbs made from whatever bread the cook had on hand. As it baked, the apples softened into tender slices surrounded by syrupy juices, while the topping browned into crisp sweet bits that contrasted perfectly with the soft fruit beneath. Served warm, often with cream or ice cream, apple brown, Betty tasted like home kitchens, autumn memories, and the creativity that turned simple scraps into something everyone loved. Cornmeal mush with butter and syrup started countless mornings as hot cereal that cost pennies and filled stomachs before school or work began. Cornmeal was slowly stirred into boiling water with salt until it thickened into smooth porridge, requiring constant stirring to prevent lumps from ruining texture. The finished mush was served hot in bowls with butter melting into pools on top and cane syrup or molasses drizzled over for sweetness that made mornings bearable. This provided sustained energy from whole grain cornmeal that kept children focused through morning classes without hunger distracting them. Leftover mush was poured into pans, chilled until solid, then sliced and fried the next morning for completely different textures. In the 1970s, cornmeal bags cost less than $1 and lasted for weeks of breakfasts, making it economically essential for large families. Cornmeal mush represented resourcefulness meeting practicality, showing how basic ingredients could provide real nourishment that sustained entire generations through hardship. Deviled eggs with paprika and pickle relish were the appetizer children fought over at every Thanksgiving gathering, their bright yellow centers dotted with red paprika creating tiny works of art. Grandmothers would boil dozens of eggs the night before, peeling them while warm and slicing lengthwise before scooping yolks into mixing bowls. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and vinegar until perfectly creamy, then spooned back into egg white halves. Paprika sprinkled on top added color and smokiness. In Black households during the 1970s, deviled eggs symbolized celebration, appearing at every gathering from church dinners to reunions. Children would hover near the kitchen, waiting to sneak one before dinner, knowing that once adults arrived, these treats would disappear. The combination of creamy richness, tangy pickle brightness, and paprika's heat satisfied everyone. Collard green and onion hash gave leafy greens a starring role, turning a traditional dinner side into a savory breakfast companion. Fresh collard greens were sliced thin and quickly sautéed with sweet onions, a little garlic, and a splash of vegetable broth until tender yet vibrant. The result was a smoky, nutrient-rich hash that paired beautifully with eggs, grits, or cornbread. Some families added diced potatoes for extra heartiness, while others seasoned with a pinch of red pepper flakes to wake up the taste buds. This dish reflected a deep appreciation for garden vegetables and the ingenuity of African-American cooks who brought dinner flavors to the morning table. Collard green and onion hash provided iron, vitamins, and a satisfying warmth that lasted through long days. Its quick preparation and bold taste made it a weekday favorite, while its connection to Southern tradition made it feel timeless, proving that breakfast could be as wholesome and flavorful as any evening meal. Hummingbird cake was the moist, fruit-filled reunion dessert that felt tropical, even under heavy summer heat, blending bananas, pineapple, and chopped nuts into a batter that baked into tender, fragrant layers. The cake came out soft, dense, and sweet with a texture that felt almost like banana bread lifted into a celebration cake. Once cooled, it was frosted with creamy, tangy icing that balanced the richness and made every slice feel decadent. Families loved hummingbird cake because it stayed moist for days, fed many people, and traveled well across long reunion tables. Its flavors were bright, comforting, and unmistakable, making it one of the first cakes to disappear. Whenever dessert plates were passed around, hummingbird cake tasted like sunshine hospitality and the joyful abundance that defined reunion gatherings. Mustard greens with cornbread was a savory pairing that many families leaned on as a breakfast, though it was eaten at other times of day too. Mustard greens, boiled until tender, were seasoned with bits of pork fat or salt for flavor. Eaten alongside hot cornbread, the meal balanced vitamins with starch, offering both nutrition and energy. It was cheap, filling, and deeply tied to tradition. For children, the bitterness of the greens was often softened by crumbling cornbread into the potlikker broth, making it more palatable. Adults valued it as a sustaining meal that honored resourcefulness and cultural heritage. Mustard greens with cornbread symbolized strength and survival, representing the kind of food that nourished more than just hunger. It was humble, but it carried families through mornings when resources were thin, but resolve was strong. This dish was one of the quiet backbones of community kitchens, a reflection of endurance and resilience during times of hardship. Smoked turkey necks with beans were a dish that carried deep, smoky flavor into a pot of humble legumes. Turkey necks were affordable and often overlooked at markets, making them perfect for families who needed cheap protein. Simmered slowly with beans, onions, and peppers, the necks released flavor that transformed plain beans into a rich, hearty stew. The meat could be picked from the bones and mixed back in, ensuring that nothing was wasted. This dish was particularly popular in the South, where smoked meats were prized for their ability to season large pots of food. Served with cornbread, it provided warmth and satisfaction that carried families through long days. Smoked turkey necks with beans became a reminder that flavor did not depend on expensive cuts, but on patience and tradition. It was food that spoke to both survival and comfort, feeding bodies and spirits in difficult years. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside. Fried cornbread dressing made from scratch became holiday tradition that stretched expensive turkey into meals feeding extended families gathering from across cities and states for celebration. Day-old cornbread was crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions, celery, sage, chicken broth, and eggs, then baked until golden on top and creamy inside with perfect texture. This wasn't stuffing cooked inside the bird, but Southern dressing baked separately in pans, allowing better control over texture and flavor throughout. The cornbread absorbed the broth and seasonings, becoming savory and moist with crispy edges that everyone fought over at dinner tables. Families made huge pans because this was as important as the turkey itself, sometimes more important given its cultural significance to gatherings. In the 1970s, cornmeal was cheap enough that making cornbread for dressing didn't stress budgets even during expensive holiday meals celebrated properly. Each family had their own variations, with recipes guarded and passed down through generations of women who took pride in their dressing. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Pea hull broth was a whisper of a meal, simple but steady. It started after shelling peas for supper, when the hulls piled high in the bowl. Instead of tossing them, families boiled them down into a thin, tea-colored broth. The scent filled the room, earthy and green, like the smell of gardens after rain. Some added salt, others a small spoon of butter, but most drank it plain, grateful for what it offered. It was a tonic for the tired, a light soup for those who had more hunger than food. During lean seasons, it became the first course and sometimes the only course. It carried vitamins, flavor, and memory in one humble bowl. Pea hull broth showed the wisdom in using everything, even what others called waste. It was not fancy, but it was faithful, feeding families with nothing more than time, heat, and care. The warmth of it settled deep, a quiet kind of comfort that made the world feel generous again. Turnip and potato hash was a skillet meal that worked wonders when meat was scarce or simply unavailable. Families would dice turnips and potatoes, fry them together in drippings or lard, and season them with onions, salt, and pepper. The combination produced a dish that was both hearty and inexpensive, making it a frequent breakfast or supper in households trying to stretch limited supplies. Turnips were especially important because they were cheap, easy to grow, and available in gardens or local markets. Blended with potatoes, they created bulk without requiring meat to make a plate feel substantial. This hash was also flexible, with families adding whatever scraps of vegetables they had on hand to improve flavor. Though simple, it offered warmth and familiarity to those who often faced uncertainty at mealtime. Turnip and potato hash might not have been glamorous, but it carried families through tough years and gave comfort with every bite. Chess pie was the pantry-friendly reunion dessert that proved simple ingredients could create something unforgettable with only a few motions of a practiced hand. Eggs, sugar, buttermilk, and a scoop of cornmeal mixed into a smooth, pale filling that baked into a golden top with a delicate crackle and a custard center that tasted sweet, warm, and familiar. The pie needed no fruit, no glaze, no decoration, because its flavor stood strong on its own, carrying a richness that came from the balance of creamy custard and a hint of cornmeal texture. At reunions, chess pie sat quietly beside the fancier desserts, but it never stayed untouched, because those who knew it understood its power. Each slice tasted like tradition thrift and the creativity of cooks who made something special from what they had on the shelf. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Sweet potato biscuits were the soft-spoken stars of every humble table. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, flour, and a touch of lard, they carried the sweetness of the earth and the strength of those who planted it. Each biscuit came out of the oven golden, warm, and smelling like home. Sweet potatoes were a gift crop, tough enough to thrive when others failed, and they carried families through hard seasons. These biscuits stretched what little was available into something that felt like luxury. They were eaten for breakfast with syrup or alongside greens and stew at supper. No matter when, they always brought a comfort that money could not buy. The dough was often mixed by hand, shaped on worn counters, and baked in cast iron. The rhythm of making them passed from mother to daughter like a blessing. Sweet potato biscuits were proof that sweetness could come from struggle, that even the humblest harvest could rise high in the oven and on the heart. They fed not just the body but the spirit, turning hardship into hope with every tender bite. Asparagus wrapped in ham created elegant finger food that introduced children to vegetables they might not try otherwise, the salty ham making the asparagus taste less intimidating. Mothers would blanch fresh asparagus spears briefly in boiling water until they turned bright green and became slightly tender, then plunge them into ice water. Each asparagus spear was then wrapped with a thin slice of deli ham, sometimes spread with cream cheese or mustard first for extra flavor. The wrapped spears were arranged on serving platters, sometimes secured with toothpicks if the ham wouldn't stay wrapped. In Black households during the 1970s, asparagus wrapped in ham represented sophistication borrowed from magazine recipes, appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because the ham provided familiar salty flavor, while the asparagus added crunch and color, making vegetables feel like treats rather than obligations. Pickled watermelon rind was a dish born out of a waste-not spirit. When families ate fresh watermelon, they saved the rinds, slicing off the tough green skin and brining the white flesh in vinegar, sugar, and spices. The result was a tangy, sweet pickle that could be eaten alongside meats, beans, or cornbread. In hard times, nothing edible was thrown away, and this recipe proved that even scraps could become something delicious. Pickled rind added brightness to plates that were otherwise heavy with starch and salt, lifting meals and making them feel more balanced. Children loved the odd flavor, and adults appreciated that it stretched food supplies further. Pickled watermelon rind became common in many Southern households, passed down as a recipe of ingenuity. It turned what was once destined for the trash into something cherished, embodying the creativity of Black families making do with what they had. Bread pudding with raisins was the warm, thrifty dessert that turned stale bread into something soft, sweet, and unforgettable. At every family reunion, grandmothers tore leftover bread into pieces, soaking them in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, until each piece absorbed the custard and softened into tender shapes waiting to bake. Raisins were sprinkled throughout, adding tiny bursts of sweetness that plumped up during baking, turning soft and juicy inside the warm pudding. As the dish baked, the top browned into a gentle crust, while the inside stayed soft, creamy, and full of flavor, filling the kitchen with a scent that wrapped around everyone like a blanket. Served warm from the oven, it tasted like comfort, simplicity, and the skill of elders who wasted nothing and created everything from what little they had. Bread pudding reminded families that desserts did not need to be expensive to feel like love. Cowtail soup was a rustic dish that turned overlooked parts of the animal into a rich, sustaining meal. Families would simmer ox or cow tails for hours until the broth thickened, drawing out deep flavors from the bones and marrow. Vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes were added when available, creating a stew that was filling and full of nutrients. Cowtail soup was a dish of patience, requiring time but rewarding households with warmth and nourishment that could last days. It carried a strong, hearty flavor that reminded families of home cooking, even in years when food was scarce. Because tails were cheaper than prime cuts, they became an accessible protein source for families who could not afford much. The soup symbolized frugality and resourcefulness, proving that even bones could be transformed into meals that held people together. Cowtail soup was more than broth. It was the taste of resilience in hard times. Okra fritters, also known as okra cakes, offered crisp, golden edges and a tender interior that celebrated the summer garden. Fresh okra pods were chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, onions, and a dash of pepper, then spooned into hot oil until each patty puffed and browned. Sold at fish fries, church picnics, and traveling fairs, these fritters were easy to eat by hand and full of flavor that tied African heritage to Southern soil. The okra gave a subtle sweetness and a soft binding that kept the patties moist, while the cornmeal crust provided satisfying crunch. Children waited impatiently beside bubbling skillets, hoping for the first fritter to cool enough to taste. Vendors wrapped them in newspaper cones so families could stroll through evening air scented with music and spice. Modern snack foods have replaced these handcrafted treats, but those who remember the sound of oil popping and the taste of garden-fresh okra know the fritters carried more than flavor. They held the joy of gathering and the pride of turning humble crops into a festival of taste. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully. then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes created summer dishes that combined fresh vegetables with smoked pork in ways that made even vegetable-hating children clean their plates completely. Fresh or frozen lima beans were simmered with ham pieces, tomatoes, onions, and peppers until the beans were creamy and the tomatoes had broken down into sauce coating everything. The acidity from tomatoes balanced the beans' starchiness, while the ham added smokiness and salt that brought all flavors together into cohesive whole. This one-pot meal required minimal supervision once assembled, making it perfect for hot summer days when standing over stoves felt absolutely unbearable. The dish was nutritious and filling, providing protein, fiber, and vitamins all in one bowl served over rice for complete meals. In the 1970s, lima beans were garden staples that families grew themselves or purchased frozen in bulk economically at stores. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes represented seasonal cooking and the satisfaction of eating fresh produce prepared simply but deliciously. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. Children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole. Pot scrappin' soup was the kind of meal that made use of every last bit that life gave. When the pantry was empty, people turned to what clung to the bottom of the pot. They poured in hot water, scraped up every browned edge and leftover piece of vegetable or meat, and built a new meal from what was left behind. It simmered for hours until the flavors came together, smoky and deep, with hints of salt and spice from earlier meals. No two pots ever tasted the same, and that was the beauty of it. Sometimes it had bits of onion, sometimes beans or bones, always something saved from before. It filled the air with a smell of gratitude, the kind that made even the poorest home feel rich. Children dunked stale cornbread in it, soaking up every drop. Pot scrappin' soup reminded families that nothing was ever truly gone, not flavor, not hope, not care. It turned waste into warmth and leftovers into love. The sound of that bubbling pot was a hymn for survival, proof that the end of the week still had something worth waiting for. Peach preserves with biscuits brought the sweetness of summer into the cold months of winter. Families would boil down ripe peaches with sugar until thick, sealing them in jars to last through the year. Spread over hot biscuits, the preserves offered both comfort and nourishment when fresh fruit was long gone. Canning peaches was a yearly ritual, tying families to the cycles of the land and the rhythm of harvest. It required time and patience, but the reward was sweetness that carried through the hardest seasons. Biscuits were a perfect partner, soft, warm, and filling, making peach preserves a special treat that brightened tables. For children, it was a taste of abundance in months of scarcity, a reminder that summer fruit could still be enjoyed when snow or frost covered the fields. Peach preserves with biscuits were both practical and emotional, offering joy from jars of hard work. They carried hope through cold winters. Red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting was the showstopper that signaled a celebration long before anyone sliced into the deep red layers shimmering under thick white frosting. The batter mixed into a smooth, vibrant red color that felt dramatic and festive as it poured into pans waiting to bake into soft, tender layers that held moisture like a secret. Once cooled, each layer was stacked carefully with generous spreads of cream cheese frosting, smooth, rich, and tangy enough to balance the sweetness of the cake. At reunions, this cake never blended into the background because its color stood bold against every other dessert, drawing eyes and calling people forward even before the meal was finished. Elders sliced it with pride, remembering holidays, anniversaries, and Sundays when red velvet marked something important. The flavor was warm, gentle, and comforting, with a subtle cocoa note that made every bite feel familiar, even for those tasting it. For the first time, red velvet cake was a symbol of family joy, tradition, and the belief that reunions deserved a dessert that felt truly special. Watermelon rind hash was a dish that proved nothing in a Southern kitchen ever truly went to waste. After the sweet red fruit was eaten down to its pale skin, the green rinds were peeled, diced, and saved for the next meal. They were boiled until soft, then tossed into a skillet with onions, peppers, and a pinch of spice. What came out of that pan was golden and glistening, sweet with a hint of salt, smelling faintly of summer rain and backyard laughter. The rind soaked up flavor like memory itself, turning something forgotten into something worth savoring. Families served it with cornbread or rice, sometimes even cold the next morning with eggs. It filled bellies when money was short and reminded everyone that resourcefulness could taste as good as plenty. The sizzle in the skillet sounded like hope, sharp and quick, the sign that something good was about to happen. Watermelon rind hash was not just food, it was gratitude on a plate. Every bite told the story of people who refused to waste even the smallest blessing. It was sweet, it was humble, and it carried the quiet genius of survival, transforming scraps into a celebration that no one ever forgot. Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful, bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation, transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format. Black-eyed peas with rice appeared on New Year's Day tables without fail, carrying promises of prosperity and good fortune into every household that honored the sacred tradition. The peas were simmered with ham hocks or salt pork until tender, seasoned with onions, garlic, and pepper, then served over white rice for complete protein. This combination wasn't just cultural tradition, but also nutritional brilliance, providing everything bodies needed from simple, affordable ingredients combined thoughtfully. The dish was believed to bring luck because peas represented coins and greens served alongside represented paper money flowing in. Families made huge pots, knowing leftovers meant continued good fortune throughout the year ahead for everyone who ate them. In the 1970s, black-eyed peas cost pennies per pound dried, making this luck-bringing tradition accessible to even the poorest families struggling through hard times. Black-eyed peas with rice represented hope, faith, and belief that following traditions would bring better times ahead, making them psychologically important beyond nutrition. Pineapple upside-down cake was the reunion dessert that sparkled with color and nostalgia, arriving in a well-seasoned pan lined with rings of pineapple and bright red cherries glowing like jewels beneath a caramel-like glaze. The batter was poured gently over the fruit, creating a soft cushion that baked into a moist golden layer, soaking up all the sweet syrup that bubbled beneath it. When the pan was flipped onto a plate, the cake revealed its glossy crown of fruit arranged in perfect circles, each slice holding a piece of pineapple nestled around a cherry that tasted like childhood summers. Families loved it because it was affordable, cheerful, and dependable, always turning out beautiful, no matter how crowded or warm the kitchen became during reunion cooking. The cake itself stayed tender and sweet, and the fruity topping made every bite feel light, even though it carried a richness from the brown sugar-glazed pineapple upside-down cake added color to the dessert table and reminded everyone of potlucks, church suppers, and afternoons when cousins shared slices under trees while the adults talked nearby. Ash cakes were one of the oldest and simplest forms of survival food, baked directly in the ashes of a fire. Cornmeal dough was shaped into patties, placed in hot embers, and brushed clean once cooked. They were smoky, rustic, and filling, often eaten with molasses or a bit of lard if available. Ash cakes reflected a time when ovens were not always accessible and fire was the only tool families had. They were practical and symbolic, tied to centuries of African American resilience and the resourceful use of corn. Families leaned on ash cakes during journeys, hard work days, and lean years, carrying both history and sustenance in every bite. Eating them meant returning to the most basic form of nourishment, stripped of luxury but full of meaning. Ash cakes were humble food that carried dignity, a reminder that even in the most limited circumstances, people found ways to survive and share. Rumaki-wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Butter beans with ham hocks stretched single pieces of smoked pork into meals feeding entire families for 2 days with minimal additional ingredients. Large dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and black pepper until creamy and rich throughout. The ham hocks released their smoky flavor and gelatinous richness into the cooking liquid, creating thick, savory broth that coated each bean perfectly every time. This combination provided protein from both beans and meat, making it nutritionally complete even though ham hocks were among the cheapest cuts available anywhere. The beans were served over rice or with cornbread, with the potlikker considered precious enough to sip from bowls like soup. In the 1970s, dried beans were pantry staples lasting months and costing less than $1 per pound for family supplies. A single ham hock could flavor an entire pot of beans, making the meat-to-meal ratio incredibly economical for struggling families. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown-up and independent. Sorrel leaf stew was the taste of home for generations who carried their roots wherever life took them. The wild green leaves, bright and tangy, grew freely along fences and fields, waiting for careful hands to gather them. Washed and simmered with onions, garlic, and a little oil, they softened into a dark green broth that shimmered in the pot. Sometimes salted pork or dried fish bones were added for depth, but even without them, the stew stood proud. Its flavor was sharp and earthy, sour and comforting all at once. For families from the coastal South and Caribbean, this dish was not just food. It was a memory of sunlight, laughter, and work well done. It was a taste of mothers stirring pots over open fires, of children running barefoot through red dirt yards. Sorrel leaf stew reminded everyone that strength grew from soil and struggle, that flavor could come from the simplest gift of the land. When a spoon dipped into that steaming bowl, it carried the sound of old prayers and soft voices calling people to eat. In every swallow lived the rhythm of survival, steady and sure, like the ocean tides that shaped those who first made it. Molasses milk drink was a common way to stretch both sweeteners and dairy during times of hardship. Hot milk, often reconstituted from powdered milk, was whisked with a spoonful of molasses until warm and smooth. The result was a drink that children could have before school or adults could sip before long workdays. It carried natural sweetness and important nutrients from molasses, while offering comfort when sugar was too costly to use. Families appreciated it because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and nourishing. Many children who grew up during lean times remembered this drink as both a treat and a necessity, even if they preferred chocolate or sugar when they could get it. The molasses milk drink proved that small substitutions could keep sweetness alive in daily life without breaking ration limits. It was simple, practical, and tied directly to the struggles of everyday survival, becoming a quiet but important memory of perseverance. Coconut cake was the tall, white winter bright dessert covered in soft flakes that clung to the frosting like new fallen snow, making it one of the most beautiful desserts on any reunion table. The cake layers baked into soft, tender rounds that held moisture well, especially when brushed lightly with sweet coconut milk or simple syrup to deepen the flavor. The frosting was smooth and fluffy, often made from cooked icing or whipped cream cheese depending on the family recipe, and once spread across the cake, it formed the perfect base for the final snowy coating. Handfuls of coconut were pressed gently against the sides, falling lightly across the top until the cake looked like something crafted for celebration. Its flavor was light sweet and refreshing, offering a cool softness that balanced the heavier, richer desserts around it. Coconut cake tasted like reunions. Church gatherings and holidays rolled into one dessert as children reached for it, first drawn to the snowy look while adults reached for it last, wanting to savor the gentle sweetness. Salmon croquettes stretched single cans into crispy patties, feeding 6 people for less than $1, proving that canned goods could become genuinely delicious meals. The salmon was drained, mashed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and seasonings including black pepper, garlic powder, and hot sauce, then shaped into patties. These were fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy outside while staying moist inside, providing omega-3 fatty acids and protein when fresh fish was completely unreachable. Mothers made them for dinner alongside macaroni and cheese or greens, creating meals that satisfied both hunger and budget constraints simultaneously. Children often requested these specifically, finding comfort in their familiar taste and satisfying crunch. In the 1970s, canned salmon was an affordable pantry staple that didn't require refrigeration, making it practical for families without reliable power. Salmon croquettes represented smart shopping meeting creative cooking, proving that thrift didn't mean sacrifice, just resourcefulness applied to available ingredients. Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Hot water. Cornbread was the sound of sizzling batter and the smell of home. With just cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, cooks created a golden miracle that fed whole families for pennies. It was crisp on the outside, tender on the inside, and tasted like the countryside itself. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. No milk, no eggs, no fuss, just skill and heat. Each cake was fried in cast iron, often in saved bacon grease that gave it a smoky edge. Children would snatch them off the pan before they cooled, blowing on them between bites. It paired with everything, greens, beans, or stew, but it never needed company to shine. Hot water cornbread taught generations that good food came from the hands, not the wallet. It was born out of necessity but carried the pride of invention. The sound of cornmeal hitting the skillet was like a heartbeat, steady and sure, in homes that had seen hard times. A simple mix of grain and grit, it embodied the spirit of those who refused to go hungry or hopeless. Hot water. Cornbread was survival turned into comfort, one crispy bite at a time. Boiled peanuts may sound like a simple snack, but they carried deep meaning during times when money was short. Fresh green peanuts were harvested from fields and boiled slowly in salted water until soft, turning them into something filling and protein-rich. They were sold by street vendors, shared at church gatherings, and eaten hot from pots on family stoves. The salty, earthy flavor made them addictive, and because peanuts were relatively inexpensive, they became a food that was both affordable and sustaining. For many Black families, boiled peanuts represented community and togetherness as much as they did thrift. They were eaten by hand, cracked open while people talked, sang, or worked, making them a food tied closely to everyday life. In hard times, they were cheap enough to feel like a small luxury, a treat that was still practical. Boiled peanuts became more than food. They were a shared memory, passed down across generations. Sweet potato pie was the deeply rooted reunion dessert tied to gardens, home kitchens, and family wisdom passed down through generations. Grandmothers roasted sweet potatoes until their skins loosened and the flesh turned soft and sweet, then mashed them with milk, sugar, eggs, and warm spices until the filling glowed a deep orange. Poured into a homemade crust and baked slowly, the pie set into a silky custard that carried the taste of memory in every bite. Its aroma filled kitchens with the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and roasted sweetness, reminding everyone of holidays, harvests, and the hands that taught them how to cook. At reunions, sweet potato pie stood proudly beside every cake, cobbler, and pudding because it represented history, home, and identity. One slice held the softness of family stories and the strength of those who baked it long before modern recipes existed. Fried green tomato. Po' boys turned unripe tomatoes into a sandwich that tasted like pure coastal sunshine wrapped in crunchy cornmeal. Thick slices of firm green tomatoes were dredged in seasoned cornmeal and fried until their edges crisped and their centers softened just enough to release a bright tang. Piled high on soft French bread with a smear of remoulade and a handful of shredded lettuce, they became a favorite along Gulf Coast streets where shrimp boats docked and music floated from open windows. Vendors often sold them at fish fries and fairs when seafood prices climbed too high, proving that a garden vegetable could carry the day as well as any oyster or crab. Families remembered the scent of hot oil and the pop of cornmeal batter while waiting in line for a sandwich that blended thrift and celebration. Today, fast food counters try to imitate the flavor, but they cannot capture the quiet magic of fresh garden tomatoes picked before ripening, fried in backyard kitchens, and shared among neighbors who knew the value of every bite. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab. Turkey necks and rice turned discarded poultry parts into main dishes that provided protein, created flavorful broth, and satisfied hunger with minimal cost or effort required from cooks. The turkey necks were simmered with onions, celery, and seasonings until the meat became tender enough to fall from the bones easily when pulled gently. The cooking liquid became rich broth that was used to cook rice, infusing every grain with turkey flavor and creating cohesive meals everyone enjoyed. Families served the tender meat over the rice with vegetables on the side, making complete dinners from parts that cost almost nothing at markets. In the 1970s, turkey necks were considered throwaway cuts that butchers were happy to sell cheaply to anyone who wanted them without judgment. A pound of necks could feed a family of 6 when served over rice that absorbed the precious cooking liquid completely. Turkey necks and rice represented practical wisdom about stretching resources, showing that every part of poultry had value when prepared properly. Red beans and rice was the heartbeat of every humble table across the South. Born from the Creole kitchens of Louisiana, it stretched a handful of beans into meals that could last an entire week. Mondays were often wash days, and this dish cooked low and slow while the clothes dried on the line. Families would toss in whatever scraps of meat they had left, some sausage ends, a bone, or a little ham hock for flavor. The beans softened in the pot, soaking up every bit of smoky spice and salt. Rice gave it body, a soft and filling base that turned the dish into pure sustenance. The aroma of garlic, onion, and pepper filled every small house, making even the leanest days feel abundant. It was a dish that reminded people of home no matter where life took them. Each bite carried warmth, comfort, and history in equal measure. Red beans and rice wasn't a luxury. It was a lifeline, a way for families to fill their bellies with dignity. It proved that flavor doesn't come from cost, but from care, time, and the will to make something beautiful from almost nothing. Field green salad was a dish born from foraging, when store-bought vegetables were not available or were too costly. Families would gather wild greens like dandelion, mustard, or pokeweed, clean them carefully, and toss them with vinegar or oil. These greens were bitter, but they were free, nutritious, and available almost everywhere. Field green salad offered vitamins and freshness that was often missing from wartime or depression diets, balancing the heavy starches and salted meats that dominated many meals. For children, it was sometimes an acquired taste, but adults appreciated the practicality of gathering what nature provided. Foraging for greens tied families directly to the land and created a sense of connection to survival practices passed down through generations. Field green salad reflected both hardship and resilience, reminding families that the earth itself could provide when markets could not. It was simple, frugal, and a reminder of the strength that came from resourcefulness. Green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions, the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be. Fried pork skin, also called cracklings, provided crunchy, salty snacks that satisfied cravings while using the pig's skin that would otherwise be completely discarded as useless waste. The skin was cut into strips, boiled briefly, then fried in its own rendered fat until it puffed up and turned crispy golden brown all over. The result was intensely porky, crunchy, and addictively salty, eaten by the handful like chips, but providing protein and fat that kept people satisfied longer. These appeared at gatherings, in paper bags at corner stores, and as homemade snacks when families butchered their own hogs for winter meat. The cracklings were also crumbled over greens, mixed into cornbread batter, or eaten alongside beans for added richness and satisfying texture throughout meals. In the 1970s, pork skin cost nearly nothing since most people threw it away without realizing its potential for transformation into snacks. Fried pork skin represented ultimate resourcefulness, finding value in what literally everyone else considered garbage and transforming it into genuinely delicious food. Pickled shrimp marinated in vinegar, oil, and spices created tangy, flavorful bites that adventurous children tried. The cold, tender shrimp infused with herbs and aromatics that made them taste complex. Aunties would boil shrimp until just cooked, then peel them and place them in jars or bowls where they were covered with a marinade of vinegar, oil, sliced onions, bay leaves, peppercorns, and sometimes lemon slices. The shrimp marinated for at least 24 hours, absorbing the tangy, aromatic flavors and developing a pickled taste that was both refreshing and sophisticated. The marinated shrimp were served cold with toothpicks for easy serving, the onions and bay leaves removed or left in depending on family preference. In Black households during the 1970s, pickled shrimp represented make-ahead convenience, appetizers that actually improved with time. Children who tried pickled shrimp discovered seafood could be tangy and bright. Corn husk pudding was dessert for those who knew how to make the earth sweet. Fresh corn was grated by hand until the bowl filled with golden pulp, then mixed with butter, brown sugar, and milk. The batter was spooned into husks and tied with twine before being steamed until tender. When peeled open, the pudding glowed with a soft yellow shine, smelling of sugar and summer air. Its texture was smooth, its flavor deep and gentle. Families made it for celebrations or simply to remember happier days. It was the kind of sweetness that did not rush, a joy built slowly over a simmering pot. The husks were more than wrappers. They were vessels of gratitude, holding together flavor, memory, and time. Each bite tasted like sunshine, patience, and the steady hands that never stopped creating beauty from simplicity. Corn husk pudding was proof that sweetness does not need gold or cream, only the wisdom to cherish what you already have. It was the song of Southern kitchens, tender and enduring. Sugar cane sticks were the simplest kind of sweetness, and they carried a special memory for children who grew up with little. Fresh cane was cut into sticks, peeled and chewed for its sweet juice, offering a natural candy when refined sugar or store-bought treats were out of reach. For many children in the South, walking home with a stick of sugar cane was as good as holding a chocolate bar. It was affordable, long-lasting, and carried the earthy, raw sweetness of the land itself. Parents loved it because it kept children happy without costing much, and it taught the value of finding joy in small things. Sugar cane sticks carried the reminder that sweetness did not need to come from a store, but from fields worked by hand. They were part of the rhythm of rural life, tied to harvests and family memories. Even in the toughest years, sugar cane sticks brought happiness. Buttermilk pie was the tangy, smooth reunion dessert that never lasted long, which is why most families baked two at a time, knowing the first would disappear before the dinner plates were cleared. The filling was made from buttermilk eggs, sugar butter, and a touch of lemon baked into a custard that set into a firm, silky center with a lightly browned top. Each slice tasted bright, sweet, and slightly tart, resting inside a flaky crust that held everything together beautifully. Buttermilk pie was simple, reliable, and deeply comforting a dessert that brought people back for seconds and thirds. At reunions, it reminded everyone that the most memorable dishes often came from the simplest ingredients handled with care. Neckbone stew transformed discarded cuts into Sunday dinner centerpieces that fed entire families from parts that cost almost nothing. Pork neckbones were slow-simmered for hours with onions, garlic, celery, potatoes, and carrots until the meat fell off the bones into rich broth. The long cooking extracted every bit of flavor and marrow, creating liquid that tasted like patience and love combined. Families served this over rice or with cornbread to soak up every precious drop. In the 1970s, neck bones were rejected by white butchers, making them perfect for black families stretching tight budgets. Children grew up knowing that Sunday meant neck bone stew, that familiar aroma announcing something special was coming. The dish represented ultimate transformation, turning what others rejected into family tradition and genuine nourishment. This wasn't just food, but cultural preservation, showing how resourcefulness created meals that sustained both body and spirit through generations of hardship and celebration, combined into single pots. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange-gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch, extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Okra and tomato stew was a dish where heritage met hunger and turned it into comfort. Born from African roots and Southern soil, it blended the earthiness of okra with the tang of ripe tomatoes in a thick, bubbling pot. The slime that many feared became silk under the right hands, thickening the stew into a rich, flavorful broth. Onions, garlic, and a few peppers added depth, while a dash of salt or cayenne made the flavors sing. Families often served it over rice or ate it plain with a piece of cornbread, wiping the last drops from their plates. This dish wasn't just food. It was identity, a reflection of generations who made do and made magic. It connected farm to family, past to present, and hunger to heart. The smell alone carried memories of warm kitchens and laughter that refused to fade. Okra and tomato stew was a promise that no ingredient was too humble to become beautiful. It was the taste of tradition kept alive, no matter the hardship, and a reminder that every simmering pot held more than flavor. It held history. Peach cobbler was the bubbling reunion dessert that pulled people toward the kitchen long before the pan ever hit the table, filling the air with the smell of peaches, sugar, and warm spices. Whether made from fresh peaches in the summer or canned peaches during the rest of the year, the filling cooked down into a thick, golden mixture that tasted like sunshine and memory. The crust varied from family to family, sometimes a lattice, sometimes a full sheet of dough, sometimes spooned on like dumplings, but always baked until brown, crisp, and irresistible. When the cobbler came out of the oven, the juices bubbled around the edges, and the scent wrapped itself around the entire gathering, making people line up with bowls in hand. Served warm with melting ice cream, or on its own, it tasted like the heart of Southern Sundays and long afternoons, spent talking, laughing, and passing plates across crowded tables. Peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was a tradition carried proudly by the cooks who prepared it year after year. Homemade cracklins were a prized treat made from pork skins, fried until golden and crisp. Families would render down hog fat and save the skins, cutting them into pieces that crackled in hot lard as they cooked. The result was crunchy, salty, and deeply flavorful, often eaten with cornbread or sprinkled over greens. Nothing went to waste, and cracklins were proof of how families found ways to enjoy even the humblest scraps. They carried a strong connection to hog butchering days, when entire communities gathered to process a hog and share every part of it. Cracklins added texture and flavor to otherwise plain meals, and for many, they were a reminder of both thrift and celebration. Though inexpensive, they carried a sense of richness and taste that lifted spirits. Homemade cracklins showed how food could be both practical and deeply satisfying, even in the hardest of times. Blackberry molasses cobbler was a sticky, smoky dessert that belonged to cast-iron skillets and long summer nights. The berries were gathered wild from fence lines and hedges, their juice staining fingers and laughter alike. Mixed with thick, dark molasses and a handful of sugar, they turned into a bubbling, fragrant filling. The crust was poured over top, sometimes biscuit dough, sometimes batter, and baked until the edges burned just enough to taste like smoke. It was messy and imperfect, but that was part of its beauty. The syrup thickened into a glossy black glaze that clung to every bite, sweet with a whisper of bitterness. People spooned it hot into bowls, sometimes with milk or cream, but it never needed help. Blackberry molasses cobbler tasted like work and reward, like something earned under the sun. It was the dessert that reminded families that sweetness could survive the hardest days, that joy could bubble up even from thorns. Liver and onions delivered iron, B vitamins, and sustained energy through affordable organ meat that mothers understood was essential for growing children. Beef liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to remove bitterness, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried quickly in hot skillets with butter. Onions were cooked low and slow until caramelized and sweet, creating natural sauce that balanced the liver's mineral intensity perfectly. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, liver and onions made complete meals that stuck to the ribs through long days. The smell filled entire neighborhoods, announcing dinner time and bringing families to the table with anticipation and hunger. Many children initially resisted the strong flavor, but persistent mothers knew the nutritional value was worth the battle every time. In the 1970s, liver cost less than half what ground beef cost, making it accessible when budgets were impossibly tight. This dish represented mothers' nutritional wisdom combined with determination to keep families healthy. Which soul food classic do you wish would make a comeback? Share your memories in the comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe so we can keep these treasured recipes alive for future generations.